Welcome back, everybody, to our 5-Minute Bible Study series. Today we're doing Psalm 32. You can see on our little white dots, we're slowly creeping towards 50. That'll take us 1/3 of the way through the Psalms. It's quite it is, of course, the longest book as far as chapter-wise in the Bible. I don't know about length, whether it's the longest or not. I know Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. It's very long. But I don't know if Psalm is the longest book in the Bible. I'll have to look that up. Somebody let me know if you know down in the comments. Luke, I feel like, could maybe give it a running, and Jeremiah and Isaiah also. Anyway, okay, let's talk about Psalm 32, because it's not the longest chapter in the Bible, only 11 verses. We're going to talk about the beauty of confession today. As far as our author, the author is once again David. As far as our New Testament references, I do have one in Romans chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. So if you have time, run over to Romans and check that out, maybe after the study's over. Let us now consult our themes, 2 for today. Number 1, confession brings peace. In contrast to that, stubbornly resisting confession will destroy your relationship with God, and it will destroy you internally over time. One definition here, and that is the word blessed. Now, you probably know what the word blessed means. You could probably use that one in a sentence, but it carries kind of a special meaning here in the Hebrew word, and that's the idea of happiness. So, blessed appears in Psalm 32, 1 and 2. It carries the idea of being happy. A forgiven man is a happy man, and that is in contrast to the unhappy condition of living in unconfessed sin. Jesus uses the word blessed in a similar way in the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. The idea is happy is the man who, has such and such characteristic. Let us now slither like a snake over to page number 2 and talk about our outline. 11 verses, all under one heading, the peace that's found in confession. So Psalm 32 is a meditation on the relief that a person gets when they confess their sins to God. And this is coming from David's own personal experience. We read about some of his mistakes in the Bible, and he's telling us now that resisting confession is terrible, but confessing things, that's the way to go. He's advising other people to do as he has done in the past. David wrote, "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered." A man or a woman who confesses their sins with an open and honest heart is going to find happiness in the mercy of God. David tells us about a time when he was living in unconfessed sin, when he was suppressing his sins, when he was refusing to acknowledge them or to get out of them. And he describes that experience as he was wasting away during those days, that God's hand was heavy on him. And I feel like from times in my life when I've done the same thing, I feel like wasting away is really a good description. Your conscience just eats at you. God's hand is heavy on you in the sense that you know that he wants you to change, and you're stubbornly resisting that, and it's tearing you apart because you're trying to live against what you know is best. David says that was his experience. When he finally humbled himself and confessed, God forgave him and he found relief. David encourages other people to do the same, to confess their sins before it's too late and they don't have any opportunity any longer. He wanted people to turn away from their sins willingly. He gives the example of a horse. He says, I don't want people to be like a horse or a mule. A horse or a mule has to be turned with a bit that's in its mouth. There are times when the Lord figuratively has to put a bit in our mouth and turn us that way through some kind of discipline. But ideally, we listen to our consciences and we turn before that has to happen, before God has to do that. David says that true peace and happiness are found in being honest with the Lord about your shortcomings. Not acknowledging your sins is going to destroy you. He writes in verse 10, "Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but steadfast love surrounds the one who trusts in the Lord." For the application today, I want to talk a little bit more about our modern experience with confession and maybe why sometimes people don't do it or they find it hard to do. People often don't confess their sins because they're afraid of the shame that they'll receive from other people if they confess, sometimes even members of the church. It should be emphasized that there's no shame in confession. There's shame in living in unrepented sin, but confession is the path back to God. The sinner needs to keep that in mind, and also people who are receiving the sinner in grace need to keep that in mind. As members of the church, we need to be very careful and mindful about the way that we respond to people who confess. We need to keep our actions in check. We should never heap additional shame on a person who has repented, and shame on us if we gossip about that person or ostracize people who honestly confess. In the Psalms, God gives peace to the confessor. The church needs to be compounding and reinforcing that feeling of peace, not contradicting it with contrary actions.